Hello students, welcome to my live teaching learning session of BECC 132 Principles of Microeconomics 2. We have completed in previous sessions different forms of market like perfect competition market, monopoly market, monopolistic competition market and oligopoly market. These are the various forms of market structure. In today's session, we will discuss about income distribution and factor pricing, or it is known as factor pricing theory. How factor price is determined? Factor means the producing factors or inputs. We know that if we want to produce any commodity, we must have to use factors of, and all these factors of production are known as primary factors or primary inputs. How factor price is determined? In Microeconomics 1, we have discussed that the price of a commodity is determined through the forces of demand and supply curve intersection. Demand curve is always downward sloping curve, which shows inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. And supply curve is always upward sloping curve, which shows positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium price is determined, and equilibrium quantity we can also determine at that point. So equilibrium price, the price of action of demand and supply curve. But how we can determine the price of factors? Factors are very necessary for producing any commodity, and factors, when they render their services in production, then they take reward in return. Land gets rent, labor gets wages or salaries, and capital get interest, and entrepreneur get profit. So rent, interest, wages and profit are the reward of all factors of production. So factor pricing is similar to commodity pricing. Factor price can also determine where demand and supply of factors are equal. Inputs used as production or factors of production. Input used in production is known as factors of production or means of production. Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur are the factors of production which can be sold or purchased in the market. For the simplicity, we explain market for labor. However, the theory is for all productive factors. This factor pricing theory is related to all factors of production. We can determine the factors of each and every factor which contribute in the production of goods and services. So in today's session, we will discuss about all these things, how factor price is determined and who propounded the first theory related to factor pricing theory, and what is the difference between classical theory of factor pricing and modern theory of factor pricing. So let us start from first topic, distribution of income. Distribution. Distribution means sharing of wealth that is produced among the different factors of production. The production of goods and services is a joint operation, or all the factors when give jointly their contribution in the production of goods and services, only single factor can't produce any commodity. When we combinedly use all the factors of production, then we can produce goods and services. So, production of goods and services is a joint operation. All the different factors of production, like land, labor, capital, enterprises, are combined together in a joint activity. Therefore, distribution of income is the systematic attempt to account for the sharing of the national income among the owners of all the factors of production. Because factors of production's owner rendered their services in productive activity, and after rendering their services they get reward in form of rent, interest, wages and profit. Thus, rent of land, wages of labor, interest on capital, and profit to the entrepreneur, all these leads to effective and efficient distribution of income. So, distribution of income concept is related to the distribution of national income among the factors of production or the owners of factors of production. Now, next is input market. How we can explain input market? There are different types of market like commodity market, factor market. Factor market is known as input market. Money market, where money can sell or purchase or borrowed or lend money in money market. So there are different forms of market in which input market play very important role. In input market, there are only two sectors. One is household sector and other is firm sector. Household is the owner of all the factors of production and firm is main producing sector. We know that firm always produces goods and services and household, who is the owner of all the factors of production, provide factors of production to the firm sector. And in return, firm produces goods and services and provided to household sector. And at present, we know that all the transactions are made by money. Money plays very important role for each and every transactions. Before the origin of money, barter system was exist in the economy. But at present, all the transactions are done by money. So when firms hire all the factors of production from the household sector, then firm will give return to the household sector in form of rent, interest, wages and profit. And household sector will get goods and services from the firm sector and household sector will also pay or give money back to the firm sector for their goods and services. This is known as input market, where inputs are purchased by firm sector and provided by household sector. Next is demand for inputs. Demand for input or factor is called derived demand. Derived demand means indirect demand. This is because the demand for a factor of production is derived from the demand of output. When the demand for anything is occurred or derived due to another thing, that is called derived demand, because this type of demand is not direct demand, but if consumer demand for goods and services, that is called direct demand, because goods or consumption, when we consume any goods, that gives us direct satisfaction. So if any commodity satisfy your wants directly, that type of demand is called direct demand. But indirect demand is that demand which not directly satisfy your wants, but indirectly it can satisfy the needs or wants of the consumer. Like land demand is derived demand. Why farm sector demand for land? Because land is a producing factor. Without land, we can't produce anything. So land demand occur due to the demand for goods and services. That's why demand for land, demand for labor, demand for capital is known as derived demand, because all the factors are demanded for output, or if we want to produce output, then we must have to use input. So all input demand is derived for the production of goods and services. So commodities demand is always direct demand, but input demand is always derived demand or indirect demand. The second difference of demand for a commodity and demand for inputs is that commodities demand is always individual demand, but input demand is always joint demand. Commodities demand, we can use one commodity for satisfying our want. If we are taking milk, that demand is individual demand. But if we want to produce goods and services, then we must demand for all the factors of production jointly, because all give contribution jointly in the production of goods and services. So demand for input is always joint demand, because all the factors give contribute in production of goods and services jointly, not individually. Only land can't produce anything, only labor can't produce anything, only capital can't produce anything, and entrepreneur who have not any resources like land, labor, capital, how the entrepreneur can produce goods and services. So all factors demand is known as joint demand and derived demand. Next is supply of inputs. Supply of inputs, in this concept, first of all, we must have to understand that who supplies all the factors of production. We know that a household is the owner of all the factors of production. So household provides or supplied all the factors of production. So quantity of factors are fixed in economy. Supply of man-made factors are variable, but the supply of those factors which are gifted by God, that supply is always inelastic or limited. For example, supply of land. Land includes all the natural resources which are provided free by nature, and the supply of land remains always inelastic. Inelastic means which can't change according to the demand. Next is supply of labor. Supply of labor is positively or directly related with wage rate. Higher the wage rate, higher will be the supply of labor, and lower the wage rate, lower will be the supply of labor. And it depends upon the size of population, the proportion of population willing to work, and number of hours. So supply of labor depends upon size of population, working hours, and willingness to work. If population is willing to do work, then supply of labor will rise. If working population is not willing to work, then supply of labor will fall. If number of working hours increases, supply of labor will decrease. If working hours decrease, supply of labor will increase. And if wage rate increases, supply of labor will also increase, and vice versa. So supply of labor mainly depends upon wage rate. Besides the wage rate, it also depends upon the size of population, willingness to work, and number of working hours. Third is supply of capital. It's a man-made factor. Capital means machines, technology, or equipments. So supply of capital is a man-made factor, and its supply can change in long run, not in short run. Because short run we have very less time period. So in short run we can't change the supply of factors of production. But in long run we have too much time, so we can easily change all the factors of production. So, supply of capital can change only in long run, not in short run. And capital includes new machines, building, plant, and equipments, etc. Next is how factor price is determined. Same as the fixation of commodity prices, which is determined through the forces of demand and supply curve, same as we can determine the factor price with the help of demand and supply of the factors of production. The price that makes factor demand equivalent to factor supply is the point where the factor's price is determined. In this diagram, here demand curve is downward sloping curve and supply curve is upward sloping curve. And this demand is indicating the demand for factors. And supply is upward sloping curve, which is showing the factors supply, like labor supply is directly related with wage rate. So supply is always upward sloping curve, demand is always downward sloping curve, where both curve intersect each other. Equilibrium price is determined. This OP is the equilibrium price and OQ is the equilibrium quantity. So graphically, we can say that the equilibrium price is the point where the factor demand curve intersects the factor supply curve. Or in other words, we can say that where both curve intersect each other, factor price is determined on that point. Now next is land market. Unlike labor and capital, land has a perfectly inelastic supply. So land supply remains always inelastic. What is the reason behind that? Why land supply curve is always inelastic? Its reason is that land is not a man-made thing. Land is gifted by nature or gifted by God. So supply of land can't change, can't increase or decrease either in short run or in long run. So supply of land remains always inelastic, which can't be changed according to the demand and according to the increase in demand. Therefore, if supply of land is fixed, we can determine the price where demand and supply curve intersect each other. The firm compares the marginal revenue from using one more acre of land to the cost of an acre of land. If the marginal revenue product is more than The price or MRP is greater than P, P is AR. Price is always equivalent to average revenue, and average revenue is the ratio of total revenue and price. If TR is divided by P, then we can sorry. If TR is divided by Q, then we can calculate AR. TR, how TR is calculated? Price into quantity. So price into quantity, if price into quantity is divided by quantity, then Q cancel. Only we will get price. So AR is always equals to price. But if marginal revenue product is greater than P, the firm will buy the land. So land has declining MRP or MRP curve remains always downward sloping curve in case of labor and capital. And the marginal revenue product is the net change in revenue or total revenue. The firm uses land up to the point where MRP means marginal revenue product is equals to price of the product. Here, factor is land and marginal revenue product is the income which received after selling the product. So where MRP is equals to P, that is the equilibrium point. But the firm compare either the marginal revenue product is greater than P or less than P or equals to P. If equals to P, MRP is equals to P. This is the equilibrium situation. If MRP is greater than P, then firm will get more advantage, more revenue. And if MRP is less than P, then firm will not produce more because revenue is less than the price of that land or any factor. Next is, now how rent is determined? Rent is determined where supply of land curve and demand for land intersect each other. As we know that the supply of land is gifted by nature, so supply of land remains always inelastic. That's why supply curve will be vertical or parallel to the y-axis. And demand curve is always downward sloping curve because demand is inversely related with rent per acre. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is determined and rent is determined R0 and quantity of the land is also determined. So this is the determination of rent or the reward of land. Next is, according to Robert Lipsey, the theory of factor prices is just a special case of the theory of pricing. We first develop a theory of the demand for factors, then a theory of supply of factors, and finally we combine them into a theory of determination of equilibrium price and quantities. So, according to this theory of factor price is always determined through the forces of demand and supply curve of each and every factor. Next is basic concepts related to production. First concept is marginal product or marginal physical product. MPP. M means marginal, P means physical, next P means product. Marginal physical product refer to the addition in the total product due to the change in one more additional unit of factors. It can be estimated by using this formula. MPP is equals to TPPM minus TPPN minus 1. And TPP means total physical product or the total amount of product which we can produce with the help of all factors of production. Next concept is marginal value of product. It is known as VMP. V means value, M is marginal, P is productivity. Value of marginal product. When MPP of a factor is sold in market at a going price or prevailing price, it is called value of marginal product. It can be estimated by multiplying MPP into AR, and AR is equals to price. So if MPP is multiplied by price or AR, then we can estimate value of marginal product. Now next is marginal revenue product. Marginal revenue product is MRP. Addition to it is the addition to the total revenue as additional worker is engaged. It can be estimated by multiplying MPP into MR. MPP into MR is equals to MRP, or marginal revenue product. So these are three basic concepts which is related to marginal productivity, like MPP, marginal physical product, MRP, marginal revenue product, and VMP, value of marginal product. But the difference between VMP and MRP is that if MPP is multiplied by AR, then we can estimate VMP, and if MPP is multiplied by MR, then we can get MRP. But we have studied that in perfect competition market, AR and MR both remains equal, and the demand curve under perfect competition market is uniform or parallel to the x-axis. But in case of monopoly or monopolistic competition market and oligopoly market, demand curve is downward sloping, and in case of monopoly, demand is steeper. AR remains always greater than MR. In case of a monopolistic competition market, AR remains always greater than MR, curve is downward sloping and more elastic. And in case of oligopoly, demand curve remains always kinked. In the beginning, it is more elastic, and at the end, it is less elastic. So in three markets, AR remains always greater than MR. So VMP value will remain always greater than MRP. But in perfect competition market, when AR is equals to MR, so there is no difference between the value of a marginal product and MRP, marginal revenue product. Now next is input demand curve. In labor market, how labor wage is determined, where the demand for labor and supply of labor curve intersect each other, equilibrium wage rate is determined. And demand for labor curve is always downward sloping curve. MRP is marginal revenue productivity of labor. And if labor productivity increases, curve will shift to the right hand side. So if the productivity of labor increases, both marginal product and marginal revenue product will also increase, and curve will shift to the rightward or right hand side. So this is the input demand curve under labor market. Now next is input demand curve in labor market. Here, if product demand increases, product will increase, and the marginal revenue product will also increase. Next is the profit maximization condition in input market. For all three inputs like land, labor, capital, for all three inputs market to be used in a profit maximization way for the firm. For land market, profit will be maximized where the price of land is equals to marginal revenue product of per acre land. In capital market, where price of capital is denoted by K, where price of capital is equals to marginal productivity of capital, marginal revenue product of capital is equal, then capital market will be in equilibrium position. For labor market, where the price of labor is equals to marginal revenue product of labor, that is the equilibrium point, and market will be at equilibrium position. Says the marginal revenue product is the marginal product. If marginal, then we can get MRP, and if MPP is multiplied by AR, then we can get VMP. So if MPA is multiplied PX, MPK is multiplied by PX, price of that capital, marginal productivity of land multiplied by price of land, marginal productivity of capital is multiplied by price of capital, marginal productivity of labor is multiplied by price of labor, then we can determine the equilibrium position. So equation can be written in this form also. Then by rearranging the equation, Px is equals to MPA into PA, Px is equals to means price of capital is equals to MPK into PK, price of labor is equals to MPL into PL. So when which implies that MPA into PA, marginal productivity of land into price of land is equals to marginal productivity of capital into price of capital is equals to marginal productivity of labor into price of labor, where all are equal, then we can maximize the profit and we can reach at equilibrium situation. So these equations can be rewritten as MPA upon PA is equals to MPK upon PK is equals to MPL upon PL. So this is the equation of profit maximization. Now next is profit maximization condition in input market. We can define this in this sense that therefore the marginal product divided by the input price needs to be the same in all input market for profit maximization. If the firm is using too much capital, the marginal product will be lower than it should be. Thus, the marginal productivity is divided by price will be lower than the other input market. The firm should then use less capital, raising the marginal productivity of capital and more of the other input. If the price of capital is higher, then we will use less capital. If the price of labor is lower, then we will use more labor. Because producer's aim is to earn maximum profit, and the factor which is available at a cheaper cost and at a lesser price, firm will use always that factor of production for producing goods and services. So more of the other factor. If capital price is higher, then we will use more labor, and if labor price is higher, then we will use more capital. The theory of factor pricing. The theory of factor pricing is concerned with the evaluation of the services of the factors of production. It deals with the determination of the share price of four factors of production like land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur or organization or enterprises. Pricing of factors of production is a functional, not personal. The rewards for each factor of production is the income from the factors of production, but the cost in point of view of the firm. So the income which is received by the factors of production, that is their income or their reward, but in point of view of the firms, that is called cost. And you know that each and every firm wants to minimize the cost of production and maximize the profit of the firm. So, theory of marginal productivity. This theory was discussed by many economists like J.B. Clark, Ricardo, and Marshall. J.B. Clark firstly introduced this theory of factor pricing. J.B. Clark is known as classical economist. Ricardo gave rent theory, and Marshall has given great contribution in theory of demand, theory of supply, elasticity of demand, elasticity of supply, and in microeconomics. Marshall has given a very great contribution in microeconomics. Ricardo has given great contribution in the fixation of rent, and we know that rent is the reward for using land, which is also the factor pricing, which is also included in the factor pricing theory. And J.B. Clark firstly introduced factor pricing theory, and J.B. Clark is classical economist. This theory states that in a competitive market, the price or reward of each factor of production tends to be equal to its marginal productivity. So the payment made to the factor concerned is just equal to the value of the addition made to the total production on account of the employment of additional unit of a factor, where marginal revenue product is equals to price of that product, then equilibrium can be determined. Next is assumptions of marginal productivity theory of distribution. According to J.B. Clark, factor price is determined through their contribution of each factor of production in productivity. It means J.B. Clark said that firstly we should calculate the contribution of each factor of production in total productivity of goods and services. After that, we must have to pay the reward according to their contribution level. If land gave more contribution in the production of goods and services, then we should give more reward to the land. If capital gave more contribution in the production of goods and services, then we should pay more reward to the capital. So, firstly, we should calculate or estimate the reward for the contribution of each factor of production in productivity, and then we can fix the reward for that factor. But this theory assumes some assumptions or hypotheses. The assumptions of this theory is first is perfect competition in product market. In this factor pricing theory of J.B. Clark assumed that there should be perfect competition in product market. There should be perfect competition in factor market. It means perfect competition market always exists in product and factor market, then this theory will be applicable. And you know that perfect competition market is that market where all the goods are same and the products are same, price is same, no transportation cost, no selling cost, free entry exit, and no major role of individual firm or buyer affect the market price and demand. And next is possibility of factor substitution. According to J.B. Clark, factor substitutability is possible. It means we can use one factor in place of other. For example, we can use labor instead of capital, and labor and capital can be substitutable, but this is not at present really true, because all factors of productions play very important role in producing goods and services, and we can't perfectly substitute each and every factor because factors are not perfectly substitutable. Where land is necessary, we can't substitute it from another factor. Where labor is necessary, we can't substitute it from another factor. So factors of productions are not perfectly substitutable, but J.B. Clark assumed that factors of productions can be substitutable. There is a possibility of factor substitution. Next is divisible factor. J.B. Clark assumed that factors are divisible. We can divide factors of production. We can divide all factors like land, we can divide labor, we can divide capital, we can divide. But how labor can divide? If labor is 5, how we can divide it in a 2.5, 2.5? And if you divide land area in a very small pieces, then the productivity of land will become nil. So how all the factors, if machine is divided and if we separate the parts of that machine, then machine will be useless. So how all the factors of productions are divisible? It's not necessarily and it's not always true. But J.B. Clark assumed that under this factor pricing theory, that factors are divisible and full employment exists in the economy where all country people get employment opportunities. If the person is willing to do work, he will get jobs. It means full employment exists in the economy. That is also unrealistic. We criticize all these assumptions because these assumptions are based on some unrealistic uh, hypothesis. Next is state of technology remains constant. According to J.B. Clark, this theory will be applicable only in that case when technology will remain constant, when the law of variable proportion is applicable, which is applicable in short run, and maximum profit, the main goal of the firm is to earn maximum profit. So these are the assumptions of the factor pricing theory. One is perfect competition in product market, perfect competition in factor market. Next is possibility of factor substitution, divisible factor, full employment, state of technology remains constant, law of variable proportion, and maximum profit. But we can criticize these assumptions. Why? Because these assumptions are unrealistic integration of monetary and real sectors, unrealistic assumptions of perfect competition, because at present perfect competition does not exist and it's a myth market which is not uh, real in present world, and unrealistic assumption of full employment because full employment is a very rare situation and it can't be achieved very easily, and full employment is not exist even in developed countries, then how it is possible to achieve in case of developing or backward countries. So full employment is not a very simple thing which can be very easily achieved. So this assumption is also unrealistic. And interest elasticity of factors overemphasized, that is also not true, that factors elasticity factor elasticity is also matters. If we assume that all factors of productions are perfectly elastic or horizontal shaped curve, it's not possible in actual terms. Next is indeterminate theory. This theory is indeterminate because it has not fully determined or it has not based on all those things which is very relevant or which is necessary to explain this theory. So we can criticize this theory through these points. Next is criticism can also be explained with the help of these points. Theory does not applicable in real life. Which theory? J.B. Clark theory. J.B. Clark, who gave classical theory of factor pricing, which is based on some unrealistic assumptions. That's why this theory is not applicable in real life. This theory ignores the increasing return in factor pricing, and it is very difficult to coordinate MRP with factor pricing. Firstly, it is very difficult to estimate the contribution of each factor in production, and it's very difficult to coordinate MRP with factor pricing. Next is the assumption of perfect substitution is also unrealistic and not true because factors are not perfectly substitutable. They are always used jointly for producing goods and services. So these are the criticism of this classical theory of factor pricing or input pricing. Next is labor market. Labor market is very important market because labor is main thing which can use machine, which can use land area. If labor does not exist, then how we can produce goods and services? So labor play very important role in production of goods and services. The change of wage rate can have two effects on the decisions between work and leisure, and it induces that the supply curve may slow positively or negatively. Firstly, labor market is that market where labor services can hire or can sell, and labor supply curve is always generally it is always upward sloping curve because we know that if we provide more wages to the labor will work more, and if wage rate is lower, labor will supply less. That's why supply curve of labor is generally upward sloping curve which shows positive relationship between supply of labor and wage rate. But sometimes in case of an individual labor or in case of an individual person, this supply curve of labor may be backward bending, or this curve may be firstly in the upward sloping curve and then back to the reverse to the situation. It means this curve may be backward bending curve and due to mainly two reasons. One is substitution effect and other is income effect. Substitution effect is that effect which shows that at a higher wage rate, firstly labor will work more. At higher wage rate, labor will work more and prefer less leisure. Therefore, in response to higher wages, supply of labor will increase and labor will work more. But income effect shows that as well as income of the labor increases, then the whole needs or requirements of the labor will be satisfied. Then if wages increases more, then labor will prefer more leisure rather than work. In this case, supply curve will be backward bending and turn back, not go upward sloping and not go in a same position. It will reverse to that point and it will backward bending. Therefore, if wages increases, it becomes very easier to get enough money or income through working fewer hours. So supply curve of individual labor is backward bending curve due to mainly two reasons. One is substitution effect and other is income effect. This type of labor supply curve we can draw only in case of individual labor, not for all or not for whole labor. Labor is always upward sloping curve, but individual supply of labor curve may be backward bending. In the beginning, here first of all on x-axis we have written labor or hours worked, how much hours labor worked, and on y-axis wage rate is taken. In the beginning, as well as wage rate increases, labor will work more and prefer less leisure. After that, as well as wage rate increases, then income effect will be more effective. In this case, labor will prefer more leisure and less work. In this case, if wage rate increases more, then labor supply will become less and curve will become backward bending. So this is known as individual supply curve of backward bending curve. Next is economic rent. You know that rent is the reward for using land. Economic rent refers to the actual payment made for the use of land only, and it is determined after completion of production process on the basis of total value of production and the opportunity cost of the factor. It is the residual amount of the gross rent after deducting other various amounts and also called as pure rent. Economic rent concept was introduced by Mrs. John Robinson. Economic rent is the difference between actual earning and transfer earning. Actual earning minus transfer earning is equals to economic rent. Rent is the reward for using land. Wage rate is the reward for using labor. And interest is the reward for using capital. And profit is the reward for using entrepreneur. So all these factors after rendering their services gets reward in form of rent, interest, wages and profit. And all the factors reward can be determined through the intersection of demand and supply curve of factors of production. But according to classical economics like J.B. Clark, reward can be determined according to the contribution of each and every factor in productivity level. If any factor give more contribution, that factor will get more return in reward and vice versa. So economic rent is the concept which is introduced by Mrs. John Robinson. And how economic rent is estimated? It is estimated by deducting transfer earning from actual earning. Next is modern theory of rent. Modern theory of rent is propounded by Mrs. John Robinson. According to her, the essence of the conception of rent is the conception of a surplus earned by a particular part of a factor of production over and above the minimum earning which is necessary to induce it to its work. So economic rent is also known as transfer earning is known as opportunity cost, and opportunity cost is the next best alternative which we have to forego. So this theory assumes that the rent is determined with the help of productivity of factor and its opportunity cost. Economic rent concept was given by Mrs. John Robinson, but the concept of rent was given by David Ricardo. According to Ricardo, rent is the reward for using land only because land is the main producing factor and land has some original and indestructible power. That's why land gets reward in form of rent. But Mrs. John Robinson said that land is not only the main producing factor. We use all the factors of production combinedly or jointly. Then we can produce goods and services. So each and every factor reward which each and every factor get in return like rent, wages, interest and profit, all factors income or all factors reward is called economic rent. So rent is not the reward for using land only, according to John Robinson. Land is Rent is the reward for using all the factors of production. That's why Mrs. John Robinson gave this concept economic rent, because Ricardo gave the concept of rent, which is related to only land only. That land is the main producing factor, and land gets only rent, not the other factors. But according to John Robinson, rent or economic rent is the reward for using all the factors of production. And economic rent we can estimate by taking this formula, actual earning minus transfer earning, and rent is determined with the help of demand and supply curve of factors. Economic rent arises, and we can show economic rent with the help of three situations. And these three situations are like if supply of factor of production is perfectly inelastic, then entire income will be economic rent. Therefore, in this case, transfer earning will be zero. If supply curve is perfectly inelastic means curve will be vertical, and demand curve will be downward sloping curve, and in this case economic rent will be zero. All and then entire income will be economic rent and transfer earning will be zero. If supply of factor is perfectly elastic, then curve will be horizontal line, and in this case whole amount will be called transfer earning. In this case, economic rent will be zero. And if supply of factor of production is neither perfectly elastic nor perfectly inelastic, in this case, half portion will be economic rent and half portion will be transfer earning. We can show these three situations with the help of these diagrams. In this diagram, first diagram is showing that supply is perfectly inelastic. Here the supply of land, we know that land supply is always inelastic. Demand curve is always downward sloping curve. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is determined and rent is also determined. Here the portion which is shaded area, this entire portion is known as economic rent, because if supply can't change, supply is inelastic, can't increase or decrease, then the entire amount will be called economic rent. In second diagram, here supply of factor is perfectly elastic, which can be easily changed or easily increase or decrease. Demand curve is same as downward sloping curve, where demand and supply curve intersect each other. Equilibrium point is determined. At this equilibrium point, equilibrium rent is determined and quantity also determined. Here the entire area is called transfer earning. Here economic rent is zero. In third diagram, here supply curve is upward sloping curve, not perfectly elastic, not inelastic. When supply is neither elastic nor inelastic, in this case supply curve will be generally same as upward sloping curve. Demand curve is downward sloping curve, where both curve intersect each other. Equilibrium point is determined. At this equilibrium point, the upper portion of this supply curve is known as economic rent, and the lower portion is called transfer earning. So these are three alternative cases: all economic rent, all transfer earning, and mix of the two, and we can show with the help of these three diagrams. Now next we can conclude that in today's session we have discussed all these things, and all these things we have discussed. Thank you.